fall, benefits and pensions, support for energy bills or social care. To find out what it means for you and your family, the Chancellor's Autumn Statement, live here on GB News tomorrow from 10 a.m.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
on TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbs and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewbs, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co. Hello there, it's 6 o'clock, I'm Michelle Dewbs and this is Dewbs & Co. Now today, UK inflation figures are out again, get this, 11% now. And we talk about COVID, we talk about energy costs, we talk about the war in Ukraine as being reasons. But what about companies plain old profiteering, greedflation, some people call it? I must confess, I am indeed a capitalist and I personally think profit is fantastic and should be encouraged. But even I now am getting to the point where I think that some companies are just taking the mick, I'll put it nicely. So I'm pondering tonight, is it time for price controls? And in the worst-kept secret, Donald Trump has announced that he will indeed run for president in 2024. What do you make to this? Do you reckon he was a force for good last time? And if he is indeed successful next time, what would that mean for us here in the UK? And get this, in the latest case of, quite frankly, haven't you got anything better to do, the Quality Assurance Agency has recommended that critical race theory is incorporated into university courses, including things like maths and science. What on earth has this obsession with so-called white supremacy got to do with the fact that 2 + 2 = 4? This world has gone mad. Anyway, we'll have all that to come, but first, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening. The top story on GB News. Downing Street says the Prime Minister still has full confidence in his deputy, despite complaints being made against him. Dominic Raab's insisted he's behaved professionally after an investigation was launched into 2 formal complaints about his conduct. Mr Raab, who requested the independent inquiry himself, told Mr Sunak he never tolerated bullying and will continue in his roles as Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor. Standing in for Mr Sunak at Prime Minister's questions today, he told the Commons he's looking forward to transparently addressing any claims that have been made.
I take it as an article of personal faith that we behave with absolute integrity and accountability. I am I'm confident that I have behaved professionally throughout, but immediately I heard that 2 complaints had been made. I believe they were made yesterday. I was notified this morning. I immediately asked the Prime Minister to set up an independent investigation, and of course, I will comply with it fully.
Well, the Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner asked Mr Raab to apologise for his behaviour.
Now, after days of dodging and denial, this morning the Deputy Prime Minister finally acknowledged formal complaints about his misconduct. But his letter contains no hint of admission or apology. This is anti-bullying. This is anti-bullying week. Will he apologise?
Now, the Foreign Minister says the UK won't rush to judgment about a missile which exploded in Poland last night until it has the full details. James Cleverly wants to wait for Poland to establish exactly what happened first, saying the UK's response will always be led by the facts. It comes as 2 people were killed after a missile landed in eastern Poland near the Ukraine border. Mr Cleverly added the incident was the result of Russia's aggression towards Ukraine in any case.
Putin launched one of the heaviest attacks since the war began, firing wave upon wave of more than 80 missiles at Ukrainian cities, obliterating homes of ordinary families, destroying critical national infrastructure, and depriving millions of Ukrainians of power and heat just as winter sets in. This brutal air campaign is Putin's revenge for Ukraine's successes on the battlefield.
Rail workers have voted overwhelmingly to continue with strike action that could go on for another 6 months. Under employment law, the RMT had to reballot its members 6 months after a previous vote. 91% of union members across both Network Rail and 14 separate train operating companies have voted to carry on taking industrial action. It's their long-running disputes over pay and conditions. Inflation rose to 11.1% last month, the ONS saying that's up from 10.1% in September. The CPI measure showed that rising gas and electricity prices, as well as increasing food costs, have driven inflation to its highest level for over 40 years. Meanwhile, Jeremy Hunt's expected to announce a range of tax rises and spending cuts tomorrow as the government seeks to restore economic stability. But the former Cabinet Minister and GB News presenter Esther McVeigh told the Commons today that putting up taxes was the last thing the Tories should be doing.
Not in financial difficulties, Conservative Party, because you're under-taxing. We've got the highest tax burden in living memory. No, what you're doing is you're overspending, and that's what you've got to look at. And something like High Speed 2 is something you need to look at. Lots of people call it a white elephant. It's ballooned in price from 37 billion to above 150 billion.
Esther McVeigh. Now, Royal Naval Shipbuilding is returning to Belfast with a new site pledging to create 2,000 new UK jobs. The MOD's commissioned the building of 3 support ships in a contract worth £1.5 billion. Each vessel will measure the length of 2 Premier League football pitches, and their final assembly will take place at a shipyard in Belfast. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says it'll be a significant boost to the UK shipbuilding industry.
The job of the government was to set out a pipeline so that investors know that over the next 30 years there's going to be 150 ships available to be bid for or potentially built in the United Kingdom. In the end of the day, the yard that was nearly on its edge, nearly going to be extinct, has got a lease of life. It's got these new ships that are going to be part of the blocks are going to be constructed here, and at the same time there are some new contracts coming in the next few years for other ships.
Now, take a look at this. For third time lucky for NASA, after 2 previous failed attempts, Artemis 1 made liftoff this morning.
And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
If you're listening on radio, we can see a rocket going off into space. A crewless rocket, no less, blasting off from Cape Canaveral in Florida early this morning. It's off for a 3-week test journey around the moon and back again, all part of NASA's plans to return astronauts to the lunar surface as early as 2025. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB Plus radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Time now to get more from Michelle and Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. I have to say, it was music to my ears then in that clip you just played of James cleverly saying, let's establish the facts first before we do anything when it comes to that Polish missile situation. I've got to say, I really appreciated hearing that, because I do worry that way too many people in this day and age seem to be, I don't know, desperate for escalation in this situation in Ukraine as opposed to be desperate for a resolution. Right, I'm with you right through till 7 o'clock tonight. My panel, Frank Furedi, joins me. He's an author and sociologist, and alongside him, the broadcaster and writer Matthew Stadlen. Good evening, gents. I do often say on this show, by the way, there's almost a show in itself, which is the panel's response when we are listening and watching to those headlines. Frank, I was listening to you. Polly was just explaining then that Rishi Sunak says he's got full trust and all the rest of it in his deputy Dominic Raab. Angela Rayner then pops up saying she wants an apology. I heard you do a little bit of a tut then. Why?
I did, because bullying these days has become just another word for putting pressure on the people you work with. And in the civil service, it's become a standard excuse as a way of rebelling against your superiors. It's a way of thwarting ministers by claiming, oh, Priti Patel is bullying, Dominic Raab is bullying. Every minister seems to be a bully, and all that they really mean is they take their job seriously and they want to get things done.
Well, do you agree with that, Matthew? Packing and whining about bullying?
I think most of us have exchanged heated words in the workplace from time to time, but the less we do it, the better. And it's about power, isn't it? So if you do it to people who are below you in the pecking order, and a minister is obviously at the top of that pecking order, that's not a good thing. Step back for a second. What have we got? We've got a new administration, same old Tory government, new Prime Minister, new administration. And we've had Gavin Williamson resign within a couple of weeks of Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister. Huge pressure on Suella Braverman, which may return to be sacked. And now we've got allegations of bullying against the Deputy Prime Minister. Is quite remarkable. But
don't you think it's also quite a witch hunt? Because sometimes when I sit and I look at the pressure being put onto these people you're suggesting, I look at it and I think it's often the media and the opposition. It's people coming together, creating this pressure because they want their outcome. That, to me, could also be construed as a form of bullying.
I don't think if you're a cabinet minister, if you're a prime minister, you can really be said to be the victim of bullying because you've got such power. You literally run the country. Therefore, for example, I don't punch.
So you can't be bullied if you're in a position of power.
Very difficult, I think.
What is bullying? It just means putting pressure on people. If I'm running a show and I want something done, I don't always want to say, oh, please, could you do this? Sometimes you've got 10 minutes to get something done. Do it.
To put it in everyday language.
And that's bullying.
To put it in everyday language, I don't punch down, so I punch up. So if Boris Johnson is Prime Minister or Rishi Sunak is Prime Minister, they have power. They have the power to run our country. We all depend on them in some way, and therefore they should be scrutinised and criticised.
Well, I wasn't even supposed to be talking about this tonight, but I couldn't help it. What do you think to those comments, by the way? I personally think that people are getting a little bit too soft, and I worry, so I do, about the workplace of the future, because you've got all these young kids coming through university and all the rest of it, haven't you? And they're so used to their trigger warnings, their safe spaces, all the rest of it. And then you enter the world of work, and by equal, they get a shock to their system, because often tempers do run high, people do get frustrated, you do get passion and you want outcomes, and often you don't get those outcomes by sitting there going, oh, please, would you mind if you did this, and here's a trigger because I might lose my temper. That's just not the real world. Anyway, I want your thoughts on our topics tonight. I want to talk to you about inflation, 11% plus now in this country, and we know some of the reasons, don't we? But I'm asking you about pure corporate greed. Do you think many companies are getting ahead of themselves, using inflation, if you'd like, as an opportunity to basically rip us off? Unfortunately, as a capitalist, it pains me to say it, but I do think that is a situation that we find ourselves in. And Donald Trump, he's back. There was lots of willies, weren't he? Well, yes, he is indeed apparently going to run for presidency in 2024. What do you make to that? Good thing? And what would it mean to the UK if indeed he was successful? And speaking of universities, this whole critical race theory, I mean, I've got to be honest, I think it's borderline ridiculous now, but apparently white supremacy is everywhere. And now an agency has recommended that all courses, including things like science and maths, touch upon exploring this. I laugh a little bit because I do think, quite frankly, it's become ludicrous now, hasn't it? What's white supremacy got to do with mathematics? I don't know, you tell me. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to gather your thoughts and share them with me. You can get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk is my email, or you can tweet me at gbnews. So get your fastest fingers going, type me your thoughts, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. I have to say, goodness me, that conversation about bullying has really got you guys talking. In the break there, Lee says, tell that lefty loony that saying you can't be a victim of bullying if you hold power is ridiculous. He's saying that's akin to saying you can't be a victim of racism if you're white. I've got to be honest, I think he means you when he says lefty loony, Matthew. How do you respond to that?
I don't think that the media holding government to account in a democracy can be considered bullying. A witch hunt, that's a different question. Now, there are people with agendas out there on the left of politics and on the right of politics, and absolutely some of the...
That's not anything to do with your point about power. That's what he's coming back on.
It absolutely is. There will be some left-wing journalists who would love to find dirt on the Conservative government and try to find dirt and sometimes do. Now, you may describe that as a witch hunt. It's not bullying. If you are the Prime Minister, you have more power than anyone else in the country. Yes, you could be the victim of racism. Of course you could. Someone could be racist about Rishi Sunak. Can journalists bully a Prime Minister? I think that's a far stretch. It's certainly got nothing to do with being a left-wing loony.
Well, I'll tell you what, my producer's going to hate me because I'm supposed to be talking to you about the cost of living, but instead I'm going to flip things and bring in Donald Trump at this point because my second topic tonight was Donald Trump. You're saying, Matthew, Donald Trump, by the way, obviously has announced that he's going to run again in 2024. You're saying that someone in ultimate power can't be bullied. I would argue that someone like Donald Trump was indeed bullied.
He would love you to argue that because he sees himself, or he likes to portray himself, sometimes as the victim. So he can either be this sort of so-called alpha male where he's thumping the table and bullying other people, or he turns around and says, oh, it's the establishment, they're after me, I'm talking to you from my ballroom in my great estate in Florida, I'm the victim. No, you're not the victim, Donald Trump. You are absolutely not the victim. You're a bully. The idea that the press, by holding him to account, are bullying him, You're suggesting we live in a totalitarian state. If we don't have a free press that can hold power to account, we're going to end up like Qatar, and we all know what Qatar is
This has nothing to do with the free press. The point is, at the moment, the civil servants and the unions are using the charge of bullying as a way of having a go at their people that are their ministers and people who are...
What's your evidence for that? Why are you suggesting there wasn't real bullying at stake?
Yeah, well, it seems to me that we can make a judgment call when you see time and time again that ordinary meetings are recast as a bullying drama. But there's a more fundamental point here. You love to use the word bullying in a kind of very promiscuous way. I think that when you do that, you're both infantilizing yourself and you're infantilizing young adult people, because there used to be a time when the only people that could bully one another was children. It was a word that was used entirely about childhood. Now in British society, we come to the point where, very often, I can give you many, many cases where I put pressure on somebody or somebody else miscommunicates and calls somebody a bad name accidentally, becomes charged with bullying. And what we're then doing is we're formalizing what used to be called office politics.
But Frank,
and we're destroying the internal life of an organisation.
First of all, I'm not using the word in a promiscuous way. It was Michelle who asked me whether I thought that it was possible to bully a cabinet minister or bully a prime minister. What I'm doing is responding to a story in which our deputy prime minister, who has huge power, is being accused of bullying. He is capable of bullying another adult. Of course he is. If I were, when I was an LBC presenter, to have started shouting, and I don't know what Rob has or hasn't done, but if I were to have started shouting at a junior member of staff, putting intolerable pressure on them, maybe insulting them, that's bullying. I don't care whether I'm an adult or a child. Of course it is.
So if you shout at someone, that's bullying?
I think it can be a form of bullying, yes. I don't think people should shout. Listen, we're now in the 21st century.
But you're saying that impolite behaviour is bullying. That's what you're talking about. Impolite behaviour.
Not necessarily, no.
And being coarse.
No, Frank, I could be impolite to you now, which I won't be, but I could be impolite to you. That doesn't mean I'm bullying.
Exactly.
But impolite behaviour can be a feature of bullying.
Yeah, but it becomes an entirely subjective accomplishment. So basically what we're saying is that at a certain point, my coarseness or my losing control becomes not just simply a temporary act, but it becomes something much more dangerous than that. And I think when we go down that road, we destroy office life. We destroy because we formalize it.
You take nastiness out of office life and you think you destroy it.
Well,
I think most people watching this show would like to work in an office where they are not subjected to undue nastiness, where they are not bullied.
Why do you call shouting nastiness?
Well, if you're shouted at, how does it make you feel?
It depends whether or not I've done something that someone deserves to shout at me for. If I've been a lazy so-and-so or I've made a mistake and my boss gets cross...
Do you think it's an example of good leadership if, Michelle, you do something wrong...
But that's a different story.
You should be shouted at rather than it should be explained to you why you shouldn't be lazy so-and-so.
It might be an example of passion.
But nastiness...
It may be. Look, I'm not saying...
Nastiness could be done very quietly.
Hang on, you said I used the word promiscuously. I haven't. It's really important to call a spade a spade. If someone's racist... call them a racist. If someone bullies someone, call them a bully. If they're not bullying someone, OK, hands off. I think most people watching this show... This is a channel of common sense, GB News, apparently, right? Most people watching this know what bullying is. They know what it feels like to be bullied.
I don't... Well, maybe I'm thick, but all that I know is that in human interaction, we make mistakes, we do all kinds of bad things. And for me, nastiness can happen just as easily by the most quiet person who starts gossiping about you. Nastiness isn't about noise and about thumping your fist.
It's about both. Priti Patel was accused of bullying. I think she was found to have been a bully. She's tiny, she's diminutive.
But let me just... The point I'm trying to make here is that if we use bully as a generic term for poor behaviour, then essentially what we are saying is that what's bullying in your eyes, but not bullying in my eyes, becomes a source of conflict and
Everything in life, to some extent, is subjective. But I believe two things. One, most people know what bullying is. And secondly, because we're in 2022, a light is now being shone on bullying in workplaces. And I think if it is done effectively and responsibly, that means workplaces for all of us and those watching will improve.
What about if you work in the army, then? There is a lot of shouting goes on there. It's about discipline.
I think the really interesting example is rugby. Let's take Eddie Jones, for example, the England rugby coach. I'm going to Twickenham on Sunday to watch England play New Zealand. Now, he's a brilliant coach in many ways. I've interviewed him. I like him. But there are those who might say that he's a bully because of the demands he puts on his players. In professional sport, the line between bullying people and being a tough taskmaster is incredibly fine, and I don't know where that line should and shouldn't.
How about in an office situation? I mean, I know people who are real leaders in an office, and on a good day, they can be nice and gentle and moderate. And when there's a lot of pressure on, they will be the very opposite. And actually, the office benefits from the fact that they're kind of facing intolerable pressure, because at that particular time, that's what's really needed.
Well,
and we just got to get rid of this bullying thing, because it just makes us into children.
Yeah, well, I have to say, my inbox absolutely agrees with you. If I had £1 for everyone that said the word snowflake, I'd be retiring before I even got to the end of the show, because that is a common theme that's coming in. You saying, lots of you are saying about this whole snowflake thing and all the rest of it. I
mean, look at me, Michelle. Do you think I'm a snowflake?
I don't think you can't ask me if I think you're a snowflake.
You're snowflake-ish.
Tell you. I don't think you're a weak, whatever man, but I do think there is this concept that is quite synonymous with the left, and I would find it a little bit snowflakery that everything these days seems to be, oh, this is a hate crime, this is a bullying thing, this is a racist thing. Everything seems to be labelled like that, and I think it undermines the actual events that are there.
So far I've been called a left-wing loony and a snowflake, and let me be absolutely...
it was my viewer that called it that, not me.
Let me be absolutely clear about where I'm coming from. So I get abuse, sometimes thousands of messages on Twitter of abuse a day if I take a particular stance. For the most of the time I've been on social media, I do not block people. I welcome it. I take them on and I fight back.
Good.
If someone starts on me in the street, I don't take a step back. If I see danger coming down the same side of the street as me, I will confront it. I walk straight past it. I do not cross the road. You cannot find a more fearless person than me. That doesn't mean that I would bully other people. It doesn't mean that I tolerate the bullying of other people. I spent a lot of time at school as well, not just being bullied for all sorts of reasons, including my hair colour, but sticking up for other people who are bullied. I hate bullies, and I think bullying is a sign of weakness. And to return to what you said, Frank, the idea that in an office it's good when people are nasty in a certain environment. It's weak leadership. When the pressure is on, that's the most important moment when you should not
but did I actually say that it's good that people are being nasty? Because I don't actually think putting pressure on people is being nasty.
No,
I don't actually think that yelling at people is being necessarily nasty. Nastiness is usually somebody who comes from behind and stabs you in the back.
I'm not talking about pressure, Frank. Yeah. There's pressure in high-pressure environments. Of course there is. There's pressure in this newsroom.
We began with Dominic Raab, and Dominic Raab, for all his sins, is somebody who probably went a little bit too far in putting pressure on people under the pressure that he was facing. And I would be sad if a minister in such a serious position wouldn't be doing that, because then it would mean that they're not playing the role that they're meant to be playing.
Gavin Williamson was said to have told another MP that she should slit her own throat.
Gavin Williamson is an idiot. And
sorry, is that bullying or not bullying?
Well, I don't use the word bullying because I don't want to infantilize adult world.
Why is it infantilizing?
Because bully, is like the classical...
No, you just got an old-fashioned idea of what bullying is. Well, maybe it's only capable of being done between
but old-fashioned doesn't mean it's wrong.
That's not true.
Old-fashioned doesn't mean it's wrong.
In this case, it does.
It simply means that we make a distinction between children and adults. And adult behaviour needs to be judged according to a different standard than that of children.
There is indeed a saying, isn't there? Or there was in my day anyway, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen or whatever it went like.
If I couldn't stand the heat, I wouldn't come on GB News.
Heat is good.
Well, yeah, heat is indeed good. Let me ask you this, though, briefly, before I move on. Donald Trump, apparently going to run for the president. Good idea or not?
It's a really bad idea because, on the one hand, first of all, he's destroying the Republican Party. I think the Republicans would have done much better if Trump hadn't intervened. And now, basically, he's on this ego trip where he wants to maintain and preserve his legacy. And I think what's really bad about him is that somehow his own narcissistic desires are essentially trumping everything that his party stands for. So I think it's bad for democracy, it's bad for the Republican Party, and should he do well, it would be bad for anybody who's got the slightest populist leanings throughout the world.
Where do you stand on that, Trump?
Just very briefly, I think if Trump were to get the nomination to be the Republican nominee to take on Biden, it looks like it's going to be Biden. I wish it wasn't Biden. It's a massive country, America. I wish they could find someone better than Biden to fly the flag for the Democrats. But if Trump does win that nomination, at this stage it seems unlikely. I'd say DeSantis is a much more likely nominee. It would be a further massive indictment on the Republican Party, because what does Trump stand for? He stands for inciting revolt, he stands for inciting rebellion, he stands against democracy, he cannot accept his own defeat, He stands for everything that America at its best should not stand for,
But
and I think
hang on
it would be a disaster.
Hang on, because even on my little chair here, I can hear people yelling at my screen. You're saying he stands for anti-democracy, this, that and the other. Many people will say, actually, he stood for strong domestic care. So what he wanted was the best for his country. And I know, my dear viewers at home, I know that you will believe in lots of that, this whole notion of make America great again, prioritise domestic issues, prioritise your country first. A lot of people want that.
But he was really good to begin with.
Hey, don't all shout at me, because that's bullying.
He was really good to begin with because he shook up politics. But the trouble was that he is the prime example of an infantilized adult who behaves like an angry child. And
Frank, I agree with you. Hallelujah, I agree with you on that. But Michelle, just on your point, it's an important point. You can legitimately support some of what Trump stood for. Well, you can support any of it if you want, but you can believe at the same time that Donald Trump was right to stand for a strong America. You can believe in the idea of making America great again, although he now has added the word glorious. He wants to make America great and glorious again. You can believe all that, and at the same time feel sick in your stomach that a president, and now former president of the United States, cannot accept the clear democratic result of an election. You can believe in America coming first, but if America is going to come first, don't deny the results of democracy.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what else you can't deny anyway. Just how much of pressure was against Donald Trump before it even began, by the way. There were people desperately trying to dig up dirt, desperately trying to stop him, that didn't want him to be president in the first place and had half a job, even accepting the fact that he was.
But, Michelle, it wasn't very difficult. He said himself, it was recorded saying himself that he wouldn't ask and he would grab women by, I won't say the word, grab women by the private parts.
Well,
this man is monstrous.
But I'm going to say something now that is a little bit controversial, and as a woman myself, I probably shouldn't say, but when he said that comment, and we won't repeat it at tea time because there's kids watching, but we all know what that comment was, he was probably very factually accurate, because the sad reality of the society and country and life and world that we live in is that there are a lot of women out there that if a rich, powerful man is in the vicinity, they would let him
Michelle,
do
whether or not you're right.
Wanted.
Okay, whether
So
you're not,
right.
whether you're not.
Right.
Let's assume for a second you're right. Do you want someone who takes advantage of those situations, being president of the biggest democracy in the world?
Well, I think when I vote for a president, I don't care about his personal behaviour, to be honest. I care about what
even if he sexually assaults women, Frank.
When I go and vote, I listen to the policies.
Even if he sexually assaults women?
I don't know what he's done. Obviously, he got privileged information about his behaviour that I don't have.
No, these are allegations, and he himself said he grabs women by their private parts.
Let me just finish for once, without you interrupting. It seems to me that in Trump's defence, there's one point that people easily forget, which is that the Democrats were also guilty of denying elections in the past. So it's become quite common for the Democratic Party to call into question when Republicans get elected. And that happened when Bush got elected, and that also happened when Trump got elected, that people were saying that Trump stole the election. So we've got to be a bit careful of not being one-sided and seeing Trump as the personification of evil and the Democrats are being the Democrats.
Well, there you go. You've heard their thoughts. Let me know yours. On this whole bullying thing, Graham says, what a load of nonsense. Your guests are basically saying that your boss can't tell you to do your job. Ridiculous, you say. But Elizabeth says, I don't think shouting at someone in the workplace achieves any better outcomes for either party. No. She says, it achieves nothing. She was a manager and has never bullied or shouted to get things done. Brian says, Michelle, when I was at school, when children were called names in the playground, it was called bullying. And now, at the moment, I am a Conservative supporter, and a while ago, I was called scum by the deputy leader of the Labour Party. Is that bullying? Well, I don't know. You tell me. Right, I am going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to pick up with a story that, quite frankly, I was supposed to do at the top of my programme, but luckily for me, I haven't been shouted at nor bullied by my producer. He's much more professional than that. So when I come back, what indeed I will be talking about is inflation. Did you see the news today? It's past 11% today. We all know about the things that people blame it on, but I'm asking you, what about corporate greed? How much of a part do you think that is playing in our current inflation predicament? Tell me, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
The Chancellor has a problem. He's got £55 billion to find, and it could soon become your problem too. Tax rises and cuts could be coming, but where will the axe fall? Benefits and pensions, support for energy bills, or social care? To find out what it means for you and your family, the Chancellor's autumn statement, live here on GB News tomorrow from 10 a.m.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewbs with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Frank Furedi, the author and sociologist, keeps me company, as does the broadcaster and writer Matthew Stadlen. You guys are still talking about that whole situation about bullying. Tracy, you remind me of a saying that used to be said very often, less so these days. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, says Tracy in Birmingham. Goodness me, life has certainly moved on from those days, hasn't it? But is that for the better or not? Right, let's talk inflation, shall we? Because let's face it, everybody right now is feeling some sort of pinch. And now we found out that our inflation is at a 40-year high. It's past 11%, 11.1 to be precise. A lot of this, of course, driven by food and energy. But I can't help but notice, Frank, and I am a capitalist, by the way. I do celebrate profit. I'm not in bed with this whole kind of, windfall this and windfall tax that. But you know, we are getting to the point, Frank, where a lot of companies, they're taking the mick. They are inflating their prices by way over inflation. Is this greedflation or not?
Well, I think they are doing that, and I think it's regrettable that people take advantage of a very difficult situation. But we have to remember that the impact that this kind of greedy behavior has on the overall figures is very minimal, because the real source of inflation are shortages, particularly shortages of energy, also the amount of money that's in circulation and the amount of borrowing that's been sort of undertaken in the last few years. All these things are driving inflation, and the impact that the profiteering makes tends to be fairly limited. But nevertheless, I think in a difficult situation like now, we would expect all of us to be socially responsible. And
what does that mean?
It basically means that, yes, you want to make money, yes, you want to make profits, but you've got to bear in mind that if, for example, you're Tesco or a supermarket, you don't just simply raise prices because you can, because a lot of people will suffer and go hungry as a result of that. So I think a balance needs to be done. And I know the word responsibility has become a meaningless term in contemporary society, but I would expect even the most hardened capitalists to have a sense of responsibility towards our communities and show some solidarity.
Matthew, right, I don't want to make this all about me, but my mobile phone contract, right, has gone up RPI plus 3.9%. And it's infuriated me because I sit there and I think, so you've already hiked it because of inflation, fair enough, whatever, but now you're adding an extra 4% on. And I think it's outrageous to the point where I'm on the cusp of starting a one-woman campaign. I'm about to do a whole undercover investigation looking at what is going on with these supply chains. Are these rises often justified? Because I do not think they are. And as a capitalist, it hurts me a little bit to say that. Where do you stand?
You're on the receiving end of the sharp teeth of capitalism. Look, don't get me started on mobile phone companies. They've made me want to tear every remaining hair of my head out of my head. But I saw in an article today that certain food items in supermarkets have shot up by something like 70%, 80% in a year. Now, inflation is 11%, and that takes into account all sorts of different rises. Some will bring it down, some will push it up. But 70 or 80%, that seems to me to be completely outrageous. Now, the difficulty when it comes to companies is, as I understand it, I'm not an economist, but they owe a fiduciary duty to their shareholders. That suggests, therefore, that we may need to regulate areas of our economy that we don't already regulate. I, like you, because I would describe myself very broadly speaking as a capitalist, but with a soft touch to make sure we have a safety net so we live in a civilised society. But that does make me feel quite queasy. Having said that, the energy sector is regulated. And if the energy sector were not regulated, and if the government hadn't stepped in, people who are already struggling, as we know, to choose between heating and eating, feeding their families or keeping their families warm, would be in even worse condition than they are at the moment. The really scary thing, and I said this on your show last week, is that there are no easy choices here because we are in, you don't need to exaggerate it, the reality is we are in a real mess. People are really, really struggling out there. And of course, when inflation goes up, that puts huge pressure on the Bank of England to raise interest rates. What does it mean if interest rates go up? It means that people's mortgage rates go up. And that is terrifying.
I'll tell you what, don't go up there if interest rates go up. The savings rates, the interest rates on your savings account, they're never quick enough, are they, these banks? Within a nanosecond, you get text messages about your mortgage going up. I'm still waiting to receive a text message if you've got a savings account. Good luck with that. Frank, though, I have to say, even though things are getting worse financially, there is an awful lot these days now of help and support. I was reading today about these so-called warm spaces, where you've got this council now, they're saying if you can't afford whatever, you can come in, you can get showered, you can have your meals, they're going to put film clubs on, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. So part of me wonders, of course I don't want people to struggle, but then there is a small part of me as well that wonders if out of this challenge is going to come some element of community again.
Well, it always does. Historically, people forget that during the 1930s, in the height of the Depression, communities showed an incredible degree of solidarity and people came together and helped each other. I think we have to remember that things are not as bad as they're going to be. At the moment, the rate of inflation is around 11%. I would imagine that by September next year, we're kind of pushing towards 20%. And that's a massive rise. And it seems to me that we got to begin to think about the fact that in a sense, we're in for a long, not recession, but depression, as a result of the economic decisions that were taken within different nations, but also the global circumstance. And the only way that we can come out of this strong and confident is if we manage to get our communities to get their act together and do more of what we're talking about, Michelle, because that's the way forward. We can't always rely on government to make things right. We need our neighbors and we need our family members and our communities to begin to see how we can give confidence to one another to be able to deal with this.
Final word to you,
just very quickly, on the face of it, I agree with you. Community is absolutely essential. But it also worries me to hear people coming from your side of the political debate, or roughly where you are, saying those things. Why?
Which is my side.
But why? I think we're on different sides of the debate. I think that's been clear. But why does it worry me? It worries me because that's an excuse, or can be used as an excuse, misused as an excuse, for the state not to step in, for the state to take the brakes off, the state to say, look, we're not going to fund the welfare state properly and humanely. That really worries me. It's so important at times like this that benefits And benefits are used by people who are working and people who are not working, rise with inflation, because if they don't, the people at the top end, people earning hundreds of thousands or millions, they'll be relatively fine. The people at the bottom end will be squished. The community didn't help people in the Dickensian slums.
Well, I'll tell you what, you talk about benefits. I'll tell you what this government does need to get on top of. I think it was £8 billion last year lost to fraud when it comes to benefits. So unfortunately, yes, I do agree, Matt, a lot of people in need do need benefits, but I do worry that in this country we have a welfare state that is indeed a little bit too easy to take the Michael out of. Tell me your thoughts on all of that. GBViews at gbnews.uk is the email address you can get me on. Right, quick break, and when I come back, I have to laugh. In fact, I need to not laugh because it's a very serious topic, but critical race theory, right? This whole kind of notion of white supremacy and all the rest of it, and all basically you're all walking racists and all this and all that. What has that got to do with subjects like maths and computing? I'm asking because now apparently this whole thing does need to be included on such courses. Tell me your thoughts and I'll see you in a couple of minutes to discuss that.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewbs, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewbs, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs & Co. Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. right through till 7 o'clock. Frank Furedi, the author and sociologist, keeps me company, as does the broadcaster and writer Matthew Stadlen. Welcome back, everybody. Let's move on, shall we, and talk about critical race theory. If you've just joined me, by the way, you've missed us talking about bullying and what is bullying, also about Donald Trump, whether or not it's right and a good thing if he returns back to politics properly. And also, we've just been talking as well about corporate greed. You can keep your thoughts on any of that coming in on the email gbviews@gbnews.uk. But get this, right, the whole critical race theory, in short, I mean, it's a bit more complex than this, but the whole kind of ethos of it is that if you're white, basically, you're privileged, white supremacy and all this and all that. Well, there's a new body now that monitors university course standards, and it's encouraging said universities to decolonise their curriculums by incorporating parts of this whole critical race theory. Frank, I couldn't help but notice that you wrote a column about this in the Daily Mail. You called it a catastrophic blow to free speech. Why?
Well, the issue is not whether you believe in critical race theory or not. The issue is that universities are meant to be places of academic learning. And if you impose a political doctrine and insist that that should be institutionalized, that all universities must sign up to the decolonization of the curriculum, then what you're saying is that there is no longer a debate. What you really are saying is that universities become a place of indoctrination rather than of studying and discussion and debate. And I know that there are many, many different ways in which people are able to deal with race. Some of them oppose critical race theory, others support it. I like to see a proper discussion and debate, not it being given a privileged position where essentially students coming into the university are forced to sign up to what is in fact a fairly ideologically driven dogmatic doctrine, most principally expressed by this very silly idea of white fragility, which basically means that if I deny being a white supremacist, that's a symptom, a marker of the fact that I'm white, I suffer from white fragility.
You don't look very fragile to me, Frank.
Thank you.
Matthew, where do you stand? Do you agree with him?
I'm disappointed to say that I agree with quite a lot of that.
You shouldn't be disappointed. He speaks sense.
If I were at university now and I was doing my classics course at Cambridge, and instead of learning about Homer or ancient philosophy or ancient history, I was being told that I was privileged because I was white, I'd be rather annoyed. I don't think it's the right environment for that. The idea that you are going to be taught some form of critical race theory, and I think it's basically critical race theory suggests that racism is institutionalised, which, by the way, it is, that we've had a massive problem with racism both in our past and our present, which, by the way, we do. But the idea that in a computing class or a mathematics class you should be talked to about this seems to me relatively absurd. Do we need to, and this is really important, do we need to change the way we look or develop the way we look at our own history in Britain and other countries? I'm sure that it's the same case. Yes, of course we do. Because I was brought up thinking that Britain was basically this great country, and in many ways we are, that had won the Second World War, that had won the First World War. Churchill standing up to Hitler was something we should all be deeply proud about. Remembrance Sunday is something that we should continue to do for centuries, I believe. We should remember the sacrifices of those that went before us, including, by the way, my grandfather, who won the Military Cross in the Second World War for going up to the enemy lines in France and preparing the British Army for the D-Day landings. Let's remember those sacrifices. Let's remember those heroism. But let's also take account of the fact that we were heavily involved. Yes, we may have contributed to the end of it, but we were heavily involved in the slave trade. We colonised other countries. We went to continents where we had no business being, and we raped and pillaged and we did dreadful things. We have to learn about history in all its complexity and in the round. It's just that, to my mind, the place for learning that is not when you're a 19, 20, 21-year-old student learning classics or computing at university.
But that's not what critical race theory is all about. It's not about let's review our past, let's have a critical discussion.
No, he's moving it on. Matthew's moving it on from critical race, and what he's saying is you've got to tell history what's and all.
Yeah, but it seems to me that what we're doing, but what critical race theory says, essentially, is you need to be ashamed, not only of being white, you need to be ashamed of your past. So there is nothing good in Britain's past that's worth redeeming. Our traditions are by definition shameful, and we should be loathing it. And what I think is really important here is that you and I can disagree about different historical incidents, about the slave trade, about the empire, and that's fine.
Well, we wouldn't disagree about the slave trade, surely.
Well, there's different ways of understanding the role of slaves in historical times, obviously. There's a whole
are you saying that there is any justification whatsoever for the slave trade?
You're not listening, Matthew. I'm saying that there are books written, hundreds of books written on the slave trade, and there's a debate going on. That's what academics do.
About what? What's the debate about the slave trade?
Well, it may be black and white to you, but the meaning of...
what's the debate?
Well, the debate basically is the role of slaves in terms of encouraging industrialization and capitalism, the role of slavery in terms of being responsible for racism, or did racism begin beforehand? There's hundreds of questions that are being debated, because historical events as important as slavery cannot be simply discussed in terms of black and white. They need to be understood and examined. And my point really is it doesn't matter whether we agree or not. The important thing is not to impose a single line, one line upon the university system, because that's what I'm really worried about. When we have dogmatism being institutionalized, it means that young people and academics like myself are no longer free to express their views.
Let's migrate away from the kind of in-depth slavery conversation. Let me ask you this, Matthew. Do you think that young people are taught critical thinking?
I was certainly lucky enough to be taught critical thinking when I was at school, but I went to a very good school. I was extremely privileged. My parents were wealthy enough to be able to send me to a private school. As I said earlier, it wasn't perfect. I was badly bullied for quite a lot of my time there. But I certainly understood how to think. My brain was trained. Just one example of that was Latin. It's a subject that I think is really important, and I'd encourage its introduction more widely into state schools.
Why is Latin? Why do you want kids in state schools to be learning?
It tells you about language. It gives you a perspective on life. It's the most important subject, because if you learn Latin, then you understand your English much better than if you...
I can't have this. You're telling me that the most important subject
for me, it's what saved me.
Is Latin.
Yeah,
I mean, give me a break.
It is what saved me, because I was a really bad student. But Latin opens up the world to you in a way that's indescribable. But most importantly...
Well, try and describe it.
Well, it teaches you about language, how language is constructed. And the more you understand language, the more you understand yourself and other people.
And GB News is about how great Britain is, partly. It's sort of the manifesto of GB News. Latin teaches us the roots of our own language. If you go through the English language, you will find many, many, many words that have their roots in Greek and Latin. Learning about our past and where we come from, where our language comes from, is so important as a part of understanding our present and helping us with our future. It also has some of the greatest literature ever.
Oh, well, OK, I'm obviously a deeply uncultured, unsophisticated so-and-so, but...
You've done well anyway.
Well, yeah, but I have got a little boy that'll be starting school soon, and I can tell you now, I would not, on any level, imagine that the most important thing for him to learn is Latin.
Well, Latin with mathematics and literature, but the point about Latin is that if it was introduced in the schools, it would make English people much more sensitive to their own language, and by definition, other people's language. But more importantly...
Why do I need to be sensitive to my own language?
Because it's what you use to communicate, Michelle. Can I just bring it back to critical race theory very briefly?
Well, yeah, go on then.
Look, the Black Lives Matter movement that came into the headlines in the biggest way in 2020, I think did a lot of good up to a point. So it did show that people like us have had a certain privilege. But I think the words white privilege were also problematic. Why were they problematic? They're problematic because there are millions of working class people in this country who absolutely do not feel privileged. But if you listen to the nuance of it, what it was really saying is that us three, correct me if I'm wrong, have not experienced day-to-day racism in our lives. We have not been disadvantaged by the colour of our skin, whereas people of colour in this country, unfortunately, on an individual but also in an institutionalised way, still face those disadvantages. And for us all to learn about that is so important.
But the trouble is, the reason why I didn't like Black Lives Matter is because they were essentially trying to guilt-trip anybody, the people that they didn't like, and when you guilt-trip people,
well, look, right, I might not be sophisticated enough to be able to speak Latin, but what I can do is tell the time. I can tell the time, and I can also listen to instructions, and that means that I recognise that it's almost time for us to say good night. I'm going to go think about Latin tonight, so I am. Matthew, Frank, I've very much enjoyed the debate, and thank you very much for going off script with me, onto a tangent. We like that, and I can tell you now, you guys at home are still writing into me about bullying. I'm going to leave you with the thought of Latin. Get your books out, do some homework, and let's maybe speak a bit of it tomorrow, which, by the way, Nigel joins us right now. He's up at 7. Nigel and I will be in Southampton tomorrow, won't we, Nigel?
We certainly will, Michelle, with a live audience, absolutely. For tonight, well, I'm very struck that the missile strike on Poland yesterday left 2 dead. It seems to me that President Zelensky of Ukraine jumped the gun in every way by saying it's Russian, it's an attack on a NATO country, we must act. It was almost as if